Well, good evening, beautiful people of planet Earth. It's 7:11 p.m. on the 13th of April 2025, and I'm home. I went to West End drumming this afternoon, and then I stopped in at McDonald's at Annerley on the way home, took a beautiful photo of the full moon rising. It's just slightly off being full because it was full last night. But anyway, it was beautiful, beautiful view. And I'm home and I'm sitting here and I thought, what shall I do? I could watch television, but I usually just watch, Netflix or Prime anyway. I don't actually watch, ordinary programming. And I thought, I'm sitting here alone on my couch on a Sunday evening. What better thing to do than to continue reading Greatest Mysteries of the Modern World. So it's my second video today. Been quite productive, aren't I? Oh well, not bad for a newly turned 60-year-old. Cooking on gas, people of Earth. Anyway, today's story is called Obsessed by Maniac's Sinister Shadow. Jack the Ripper. Just going to have a sip of my Jack Daniels and Coke in honour of my birthday yesterday. Still kind of celebrating. I celebrate usually, a week before and a week after, because traditionally my birthdays very often end up having something awful happening, traumatic. Last year it was my beautiful Elsa's funeral, the day before on the 11th of April, which was a lovely funeral and I'm glad I went, but it was still a bit upsetting. And then this year has had its own kind of grief attached to it, which I won't go into. And the year before, for my 58th birthday, I can't remember what set me off or what happened, if there was anything particularly bad, but I was just in this really bad mood. I was in this awful mood, and I was like, had this sort of undercurrent of kind of, I don't know what it was, kind of a repressed kind of anger that I was just tapping down. Even then I thought, what's wrong with me? My 58th birthday. And then, 1st of August, Beauregard died, so I think I was just enduring that ghastly horror. And yeah, like I say, last year's birthday got marred through no one's fault, people die. Things happen, that's life and death. But it did sort of put a dampener on my birthday about losing our beautiful Elsa, who I was very, very fond of. She was just such a bright, even with her kind of Louise, whatever kind of dementia she had, she was a bright light, shone very bright. Was an extraordinarily beautiful woman as a young woman, and remained so right up to 94. Can you believe it? Anyway, so there was that kind of upset me a bit last year. And then this year my birthday came just a couple of months after losing Charlie, so it's been a rough year so far this year. Anyway, so I'm still celebrating. Probably celebrate for another, what's today? Anyway, I'll celebrate for another few days and then I'll get over myself and get back to normal. Find a new equilibrium. Might even go back to having a crack at that bracelet I was wanting to make with my silversmithing. I've got to finish it. I've got to solder that bezel down and set that stone and finish it. It was supposed to be ready for my birthday, but I just got so gutted when I failed 3 times at it that I lost confidence. But I've got to rise up again and give another go And sometimes with the help of my muses, my angels, it works perfectly after, a series of failures. So I just have to be patient with myself, really. But I might have a go at that tomorrow. I think tomorrow will be the day. I don't want to go in and have a go at it now because I'm actually a little bit tired, if the truth be known. But I'm okay to read you another chapter, and it'll fill up my evening, and then I'll probably watch a little bit of TV before I go to bed. And the days bleed into eternity, and you look back on a life and go, what was that all actually about? Really, in the broad scheme of things, what was it all about? But anyway, living your very best life to the best of your abilities and within the confines of your limitations either imposed upon you by society or by trauma. It's hard to tell which sometimes. But yeah, just live your best life and enjoy each day. So, right, so in the spirit of enjoying each day, which is very, very important given the subject matter, I'm going to read about Jack the Ripper, who took quite a few beautiful days out from under some, women that no one deserves that. Maybe I'm not in a good frame of mind to read the story. Maybe I should give it a rest till tomorrow. No, let's soldier ahead. It's a well-known story. I know the story well. I probably won't get too triggered because I know the story. It's not like it's going to be a shock or anything. Right, here we go, babies. The hideous murders committed by that most enigmatic of assassins, Jack the Ripper, have reverberated across 3 centuries. The sadistic killer, believed by some to have been a surgeon or a particularly skilled butcher, unleashed his rage against piteous London prostitutes in the summer and autumn of 1888. Despite strenuous police efforts, he was never caught, and although virtually all other criminals of his era are long forgotten, the Ripper still casts a sinister shadow into the present day. Historians, retired policemen, authors and forensic experts continue to sacrifice years of their lives trying to establish who the killer was, naming diverse culprits ranging from a distinguished artist to Queen Victoria's grandson. That's one theory. But more than a century after his grisly rampage, the Ripper's true identity remains unknown. So he was very clever at hiding, covering his tracks, getting away with all those grisly, bloody murders. Bucks Row, Whitechapel, 31st of August, 1888, 4:10 a.m. It was the final morning of summer. Already an autumnal chill was in the air. Constable John Neal, trudging his beat through the narrow, foul-smelling streets of East London slums, was feeling tired. He had had a busy morning and was looking forward to the end of his shift and a hot breakfast at home beside the kitchen fire. Suddenly he skidded, just managing to avoid a painful plunge onto the cobbles. He had stepped into something slippery. By the glow of his lantern he saw that he was standing in blood. Momentarily he imagined the ooze had spewed from one of the meat carts that plied to and from the local slaughterhouses. This had happened to him before. But then, in the half-light, he saw the dark flow's origin. At the entrance to a mean courtyard lay a woman whose throat had been slashed open from ear to ear. Her blood was still slowly bubbling onto the ground. Reflexively, Constable Neil felt for a pulse. The wrist was cold. The woman's eyes were wide, staring. She was dead all right. Neil ran into the courtyard. Perhaps the killer was still about, but the yard was empty. He called for help. A colleague on duty in a nearby alleyway came running. 20 minutes later, the body was in a morgue attached to the workhouse on Old Montague Street. Inspector Spratling of the London Metropolitan Police examined the murder victim. A bruised and possibly broken jaw suggested the assailant had punched her before cutting her throat. Morgue attendants cut away the filthy, blood-soaked clothes. Spratling gagged. The abdomen had been sawn open, internal organs removed. White-faced and sick, the inspector remarked to a reporter, only a madman could have done this. At the inquest, police surgeon Dr. Rhys Llewellyn would tell the coroner, I have never seen so appalling a case. She was dissected in a manner that only a person skilled in the use of a knife could have achieved. I believe that person to have been left-handed. London's halfpenny newspapers reacted to the crime with unfeigned horror. No murder was ever more ferociously and more brutally done, said the Star, going on to describe the killer as the devilish dissector. Police quickly identified the victim as Mary Ann Nichols, a 43-year-old mother of 5 children, all of whom had been snatched away by a husband who deserted her for another woman. Lonely and grindingly poor, Mary had fallen into the grip of gin. To find pennies enough to pay night by night for her rented bed, she had been forced to work as a prostitute. No social welfare in those days, people. Countless women, trapped in what one social reformer called the hell of East London, suffered privation similar to Mary's. Whitechapel and the area around it housed more than 900,000 people who were either crammed into teeming hovels or were homeless and, in winter, at risk of freezing to death on the streets. For most, the only sources of income were either the sweatshops, in which 14-hour days were the norm, the cruel slaughterhouses whose stench hung thickly over every house, or prostitution, which, relatively, paid best. By night, gentlemen, young and old, would visit East London for sexual encounters that were cheap and quick. Many of these men carried syphilis and gonorrhea home to unsuspecting wives, which, by the way, in those days, there was no cure for syphilis and you went blind and completely mad and your flesh literally came up with the most dreadful sores and practically rotted off you, and the stench was intense and foul, and there was no cure. Didn't have antibiotics for it back in the day. So, what was the undoing of King Henry VIII too? He had a festering wound on his leg that would not heal from his syphilis. Anyway, it's a horrible thought, but that's what happens when there's STDs running rampant and there's no cures, and men are men, and women are women, and chilling fucking thought. But the greatest burden of misery was endured by the East Enders themselves. Their clothes and bodies were reekingly filthy. Water was in such short supply that personal cleanliness was impossible. Imagine the stench. The skin crawls just to think of it. Babies lying malnourished in makeshift cots faced myriad hazards. They risked infection not only from debilitating disease, but from the very water their mothers used to clean them. One of the commonest causes of death in infants was gangrene caused by rat bite. The mortality rate across all levels of the population was so high that mortuaries were overwhelmed. Many families were forced to keep, many families were forced to keep a loved one's corpse in the house until the day of the funeral. Too often it was a pauper's funeral. Above this resounded the screams of pigs, sheep and cattle being rudely bludgeoned or knifed to death in the open slaughterhouses which dominated the slum landscape. Samuel Barnett, vicar of St. Jude's Church, Whitechapel, called for these abominable institutions to be closed down. In a letter to a London newspaper, he expressed his concern for the moral consequences, especially to the children of the poor, of this open peep show of cruelty to animals. To all the squalor, the man soon to be known as Jack the Ripper added an additional burden of horror. At 6 a.m. on 8th of September 1888, not far from where Mary Ann Nichols was murdered, a market porter found a second prostitute's sickeningly mutilated body. It was lying in the yard of a house at 39 Hanbury Street. Dark-haired and blue-eyed 47-year-old Annie Chapman was less than 5 feet, 152 centimetres tall. She liked to dress colourfully. The distraught porter told detectives the first she had seen of her was a pair of brightly striped socks peeping from beneath her bloodied skirt. Dark Annie, as her friends called her, had been strangled, then disemboweled. Pelvic organs were stripped away, intestines draped over the right shoulder. A few pitiful possessions, a square of cloth and 2 combs, were arranged neatly and tauntingly at her side. Annie, a promiscuous alcoholic, had abandoned her husband, children, and cosy West London home 6 years earlier. When her money ran out, she drifted into Whitechapel, where a bug-ridden overnight bed could be rented for 2p or less. Distressed friends told police that Annie was never a prostitute in the full meaning of that word. She had tried to earn an income by selling small bunches of flowers and embroidered handkerchiefs. Only when business was slow had she resorted to selling her body. The night before she died, said a fellow tenant, the lodging housekeeper had turned Annie out into the street, telling her not to return before she had earned money enough for her night's board. Weak and coughing blood, so she had tuberculosis as well. She had gone off looking for a client. Annie had suspected, said the friend, that she might be suffering from tuberculosis. The autopsy confirmed that fear. At the inquest into Annie Chapman, the coroner, Wynne E. Baxter, said, the injuries, removing the pelvic organs with one sweep of the knife, have been made by someone who had considerable anatomical skill and knowledge. There are no meaningless cuts. It was done by one who knew where to find what he wanted, what difficulties he would have to contend against, and how he should use his knife so as to abstract the organ without injury to it. No unskilled person could have known where to find it or have recognized it when it was found. For instance, no mere slaughter of animals could have carried out these operations. It must have been someone accustomed to the post-mortem room. It is my opinion that the murder instrument was a narrow, thin knife with a blade between 6 and 8 inches long, the kind of knife used by slaughtermen and surgeons for amputations. The dual murders were considered too much for Whitechapel CID to handle. Scotland Yard's Central Office took over the case, appointing Detective Inspectors Frederick Aberline, Henry Moore and Walter Andrews, backed by a team of subordinate officers. From the morning the second corpse was found, East London was thick day and night, with hundreds of policemen on the beat. They were ordered to question and, if necessary, arrest anyone at all who behaved suspiciously. Basil Thompson, in his book My Experiences at Scotland Yard, 1923, recalled that the Metropolitan Police had sweeping powers to solve the murders. They could and did investigate every pawnshop, every laundry, every public house, and even every lodging house in a huge area of the city. Police distributed 80,000 handbills, conducted unannounced house-to-house searches, and questioned hundreds of sailors, British and foreign. Acting on tip-offs from the public, police arrested and questioned 76 butchers and slaughterers, all to no avail. According to a widespread rumour, the Ripper was a policeman himself. Surely only a member of the constabulary could possibly have committed the crimes undetected. Another popular theory promulgated by the nascent tabloids was that the Ripper was a distinguished surgeon who had caught syphilis from a prostitute. Rendered insane by the disease, he was now visiting a terrible revenge on every whore he could find. Doctors quickly learned never to carry their black bags openly through the East End. It was a sure way to invite violence. At the time of the killings, the theatrical version of Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was enjoying great success in the West End. The story of a gentle physician by day. How about fucking art imitating life? How's that for synchronicity? The zeitgeist. When it reflects accurately what's going on, it's a bit astonishing, people of Earth. Anyway, the story of a gentle physician by day who became a murderous monster at night did nothing to abate the public's newfound suspicion of surgeons. A letter writer to the Times urged that the play be closed down until the killer was caught. Annie Chapman's murder was followed by 3 weeks of peace. Unnerved Londoners allowed themselves to speculate that the maniac might have suicided or fled, but he had not finished yet. At 1 o'clock on the foggy morning of 30th of September, Louis Diemschutz, a caretaker at the Men's Educational Club, drove his pony cart into the yard behind his employer's Whitechapel premises. He noticed what looked like a large bundle of rags lying against a wall. By the light of a match, he saw that it was a woman soaked in blood. Diemschutz screamed for help. Constable William Smith ran to the yard from his beat nearby. He shone his lantern on the woman. Her throat had been cut. The body was still warm, an indication that the killer might be close by. Smith alerted colleagues, but the murderer had escaped. The victim was 45-year-old Elizabeth Stride, also known as Long Liz. As her nickname suggested, she was considerably taller than most Londoners of the era. Scotland Yard detectives established that she was of Swedish descent and had been married to an Englishman, John Stride, who died in 1884. Elizabeth had then followed a familiar downward path. She was frequently jailed for drunkenness and prostituted herself whenever she needed money for her nightly lodgings. The autopsy showed that her shoulders were bruised, suggesting that the murderer had slammed her to the ground and held her there while he slit her throat. It was obvious to the detectives that the killer had been interrupted in his work. He had not had time to disembowel his prey. But the Ripper would not be cheated of his frenzied plan. Less than an hour later, he struck again at 1:45 a.m. Constable Edward Watkins, patrolling his beat in Mitre Square, made a chilling discovery. In the southwest corner of the warehouse-flanked area, a woman was lying on her back, her clothes hoisted around her waist. Several days later, the still shocked policeman would tell the coroner her throat was cut and her bowels protruding. The stomach was torn up. She'd been ripped to pieces like a pig in a market, with her entrails flung in a heap around her neck. The police surgeon testified, pardon me, that's pleasant, people of Earth. Coca-Cola and Jack Daniels. So, probably reading grisly, gory stories doesn't help either, but anyway. I do beg your pardon. No, I'll never be a supermodel. Oh, it's alright. It was never on the cards in the first place, babies. Too short, too fat, and now too old. You gotta laugh though. The police surgeon testified that the uterus and left kidney were missing. The victim was Catherine Eddowes, aged 46, mother of 3 children. I notice he tended to pick on women in their 40s too. Howard was the first one. 47. So women between the ages of 40 and 50. Ghastly. Just bloody ghastly, isn't it? The night before she died, police had arrested her for drunken misconduct. They locked her in a cell at Bishopsgate Police Station. Then, fatefully, in the early hours of the morning, a duty sergeant deemed her sober enough to be released onto the street. What a shame if they'd kept her in a few hours longer, she might have still been alive. 14 hours after Catherine's death, a witness, Joseph Lavende, went to Scotland Yard. He told detectives that while leaving the Imperial Club at about 1:35 a.m, he saw a woman wearing clothes resembling the police description, which would be published later that day. She was standing at the entrance to Church Passage on Mitre Square, talking to a young, blonde-moustached man in dark clothes and wearing a deerstalker hat. Lawende said he had not seen the woman's face, but was reasonably certain from her demeanour that she was a prostitute. The description of Catherine's companion was not information of the first order. London in 1888 teemed with young men sporting blonde moustaches. The Ripper rested for several weeks. As each day passed without another murder, Londoners became increasingly hopeful that the nightmarish rampage was over. But then, on Friday, 9th of November, the madman killed again. His final victim was Irish immigrant Mary Jane Kelly, a pretty 25-year-old blonde. She was 2 decades younger than his savage predecessors. So he broke that pattern by killing a much younger woman. Described by friends as plump, kindly, and pleasant-natured, Mary had lived for 3 years with Joseph Barnett, a fish porter. The couple tended to drink excessively, often to the degree that they had no money left to pay the rent. In consequence, they continually performed midnight flits, moving to a fresh lodging house every few weeks. In mid-October, they hired a room in Miller's Court on Whitechapel's Dorset Street. In this seedy hovel, their de facto marriage ended. According to the couple's friends, Barnett had long objected to Mary's habit, whenever she needed cash, of selling herself on the streets. He did not want a prostitute as a wife. He genuinely loved Mary and hoped she would bear his children one day. It was his view, often loudly expressed, that they should live on the money he earned at the fish market. When Mary declined to abandon her part-time profession, Barnett flew into a rage and left her. He had no idea that she was pregnant. Mary and her erstwhile husband were as usual behind in the rent. On the morning of Friday, 9th of November, Thomas Bowyer, a lodging house employee, knocked at the door to demand payment. There was no reply. Bowyer reached in through the shattered window and pulled the curtain aside. Sprawled across the bed he saw what he described as the work of Satan. Bowyer ran to fetch a policeman. The young constable who was first on the scene told a reporter, "When my eyes became accustomed to the dim light, I saw a sight which I shall never forget to my dying day." In his report, the attending police surgeon, Dr. Thomas Bond, fixed the time of Mary Kelly's death at between 1 and 2 a.m. He described the scene thus. The body was lying naked in the middle of the bed, the shoulders flat. The whole of the surface of the abdomen and thighs was removed. Oh my God. The arms were mutilated by jagged wounds, and the face hacked beyond recognition. The viscera were found in various parts. The liver between the feet, the intestines by the right side, and the spleen by the left. The throat had been slashed with such ferocious force that the tissues were cut all the way down to the spinal column. Dr. Bond added that when he and a fellow surgeon tried to reconstruct the torn corpse, they found that the heart had been cut out and taken away. The savagery of this crime, unprecedented even by the Ripper's warped standards, sparked panic in London. Whitechapel's piteous hordes of prostitutes faced a particularly terrible dilemma. They did not dare to venture out at night to earn coins for their night lodgings, and yet, without money, they would be evicted from those lodgings. To walk, as one newspaper put it, on dark streets in which a ravening lunatic prowls. Relatively fortunate at this time of hysteria were those prostitutes living in the safety of brothels. The number of these sanctuaries was swiftly diminishing, however, spurred by the demands of the social purity movement and the requirements of the Contagious Diseases Act. Police in the previous 12 months had shut down more than 200 bawdy houses in East London. These closures, in the words of one social reformer, rendered thousands of women homeless, hence vulnerable to attack. Police questioned witnesses to Mary Kelly's final hours and made several arrests, but nothing stuck. They could identify no suspect against whom they could build a convincing case. Scotland Yard's failures prompted outraged editorials in the popular press. One weekly quoted Queen Victoria as allegedly having told her Prime Minister, "This new, most ghastly murder shows the absolute necessity for some very decided action. All these streets and courts must be lit, and our detectives improved. They are far from what they should be. The Times was rather more sympathetic toward Scotland Yard. The murders, so cunningly continued, are carried out with a completeness which altogether baffles investigators. Not a trace is left of the murderer, and there is no purpose in the crime to afford the slightest clue. All that the police can hope is that some accidental circumstance will lead to a trace which may be followed to a successful conclusion. This was an accurate and fair assessment. Even in our 21st century, with its abundance of psychological profiling, DNA testing, and other forensic aids, serial killers are notoriously difficult to catch. The Scotland Yard of 1888 was unequipped to solve such crimes of stealth. Even printing was an undeveloped art. The East London Observer remarked, "The murders are singular for the reason that the victims have been the poorest of the poor. No adequate motive in the shape of plunder can be traced. The excess of effort that has been apparent suggests that the crimes are the work of a demented being. Some detectives believed the Ripper had murdered at least 11 women. But Scotland Yard's official stance was that there had been only 5: Nichols, Chapman, Stride, Eddowes, and Kelly. The killings of streetwalkers before and after these victims died had also been psychosexual in nature. However, in the opinion of most investigators, they had lacked the signature and surgical expertise seen in the murders of the central group. From the time of the second killing onward, analysts, professional and amateur, besieged newspapers and the Metropolitan Police with ideas about who and what manner of person the Ripper might be. One theory that would achieve wide popularity was espoused in a letter to the Times by a Dr. Edgar Shepherd. "I see him as being of the upper class and an earnest religionist," he wrote, "a person who acts believing that he is extirpating vice and sin." Until 1914, when the Great War temporarily halted speculation, Jack the Ripper was the subject of numerous books and flimsy penny dreadfuls, most authors claiming that they had solved the mystery at last. London's Metropolitan Police Service had its own suspect list. In an official report, Dr. Melville McNarton, head of the Criminal Investigation Department, otherwise known as the CID, named his favoured 3. Montague Druitt, a 31-year-old barrister whose notorious mental instability had destroyed his career. Druitt often expressed regret that his family had forced him to study law when he would have preferred to become a surgeon. Several weeks after Mary Kelly was ferociously mutilated, Druitt's body was found floating in the Thames. Kosminski, an immigrant Polish tradesman who detested women and was officially known for his violence against them. Police records assert that he had strong homicidal tendencies. In 1889, he was committed to a lunatic asylum. Inspector Donald Swanson, officer in charge of the Ripper case, insisted at the time of the killings and long into his retirement that this man was undoubtedly the culprit. Michael Ostrog, a Russian-born thief and confidence trickster who had suffered many mental breakdowns resulting in committal to asylums. Unofficially, McNaughton also admitted to suspicions of Dr. Francis Tumblety, an American quack doctor who was arrested for gross indecency 1 week after the final murder. He was bailed at a high price and absconded. Dear Goddess. Well, he said 3, but it's actually 4 people, 4 suspects. Anyway, carry on. Detective Inspector Frederick Aberline, who had worked on the case almost from the beginning, was unimpressed with McNaughton's ideas. In Aberline's view, the principal subject was George Chapman, who was hanged in 1903 for murdering his wife. To Aberline, however, even this notion was no more than theoretical. Speaking as Chief Inspector shortly after the execution, he said, "You can state most emphatically that Scotland Yard is really no wiser on the subject today than it was 15 years ago." Official attempts to find the Ripper paled beside the efforts of the legion of self-appointed investigators who have worked on the case ever since. During the 20th century and into the 21st, forensic pathologists, retired policemen, sociologists, journalists, historians, and practitioners of numerous other disciplines have spent years of their lives vying to find the real Jack the Ripper. They continually produce a maze of mutually contradictory conclusions. Excuse me. A sampling. The insane Prince Albert. In this scenario, which became popular during the 1970s, Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria, is infected with syphilis while visiting brothels in the East End, wreaking his revenge. Skipped a few lines. As the disease develops to its tertiary stage, his mind snaps. In a murderous rage, he rampages through the East End, wreaking his revenge upon prostitutes. But where would he have got the surgical skills from when he was just raised to be a prince? And very much doubt he ever got his hands dirty to slaughter anything. It's not like he would have worked in the kitchen, for example, carving up meat and butchering or anything like that. So I don't know about that one, but it's possible, I guess. When police arrest him after he mutilates his 5th or possibly 11th victim, they are shocked to learn that he is a member of the royal family. The unfortunate matter is hushed up. Minders are appointed to keep a strict watch on Albert, never allowing him near the East End again. The Ripper murders stop. Their princely perpetrator dies of syphilitic complications in 1892, which is only 4 years later. People of Earth. Skeptics object that Albert was made Duke of Clarence in 1891, scarcely an honour the Queen would bestow on an unhinged butcher. I wouldn't be so sure about that. Look how Queen Elizabeth protected Prince Andrew with his paedophiliac tendencies. Just saying, they have a habit of looking after their own. Well, you do when it's your kids. You know, I would protect my kids too, except not if they were pedophiles, you understand. It is just beyond vile and unforgivable, but butchering adult women, prostitutes is even more or equally vile and vile and unforgivable. So let me just reframe my brain here. I have to wrap my head. Would I protect my kids if they did something like that? Probably not, because when you've got a mad dog, something that's turned into a bestial, high-functioning, brutal animal, there's only one thing that can put a stop to that, people of Earth. We all know what that one thing might be. Right, smack bang in the middle of the forehead. Put down mad dogs, to put down mad humans. Just say. No, instead they let them get away with it and continue with their crimes ad nauseum, sometimes for decades. Or they give them a knighthood in the case of Jacinta Ardern, wasn't it, recently knighted for her crimes against humanity, and on it goes and on it goes. It's all bestial, just bestial. But don't get me started on that. I'm trying to have a lovely evening in spite of this very ghoulish story. Private diaries of the time portray him as a gentle and considerable chap, and royal records show that he died of influenza during the 1892 epidemic. But all this, of course, could be part of the cover-up. The Lover's Lesson. A particular target of author's suspicions was the fish porter Joseph Barnett, de facto husband of the Ripper's final victim, Mary Kelly. The flimsy case against Barnett, which police pursued only briefly, was that he committed the first 4 Ripper murders in the hope of terrifying Mary into obeying him. Doesn't make sense, that. Motivated solely by the desire to show Mary how perilous a prostitute's life could be, he began a rampage through the ranks of the ladies of the night. Pardon me. But although she was frightened and began to suggest they quit Whitechapel, Mary remained adamant that she would never give up her source of additional income. This was a blow to Barnett's pride. He was even further humiliated when he lost his job at the market. Mary was now the sole breadwinner, a situation he found intolerable. In a liquor-fueled rage, he killed and mutilated the woman he had loved. Detectives considered the rumour, but were unimpressed. As one contemporary journalist put it, the plot of the play was strong, but the principal actor was unsuited to the part. the gruesome gang. Trevor Marriott, a British detective, devoted the first 10 years of his retirement. Just going to close my curtain. There's some idiot sitting here with their lights on in their car. They're gone now, but it's a bit disconcerting. Watching me read to you, just sitting there, it's odd. I hate that. Lurkers and stalkers and voyeurs and creeps. I have to live amongst them, but it doesn't mean I have to like it. Like, ooh. But anyway, where were we? Sorry, let's start that sentence again because I was distracted by the car lights. Trevor Marriott, a British detective, devoted the first 10 years of his retirement to proving conclusively that neither Prince Albert nor American Dr. Francis Tumblety had committed the Ripper's crimes. Among many convincing indicators of Albert's innocence was the fact that the royal diary showed he was not even in London at the time of the murders, and Francis Tumblety, he was known for his homosexual tendencies. People with such leanings would surely kill members of the same sex, said Marriott. In a 1994 lecture at the University of Ulster, the detective deemed it far likelier that the killings were the work of a like-minded group of lunatics. At the core of my doubt that there was only one killer is the fact that 2 of the bodies were found within 12 minutes of each other, he said. If a lone offender had been responsible for that first murder and was disturbed, as has been suggested, he'd have been in a great hurry to leave the area. Seems unlikely that a solo murderer would have lingered to dispose of his second victim. I don't know, because there's such a thing as like a bloodlust type killing frenzy. You get that in wars, you know, when they're so on so much heightened adrenaline and they're just like frenzied wild fucking animals, they just can't stop killing. You get that. So it's possible, it is possible that he killed 2 within minutes of each other. But, you know, people just want to think best of people, don't they? Oh, smallest violin. The cruel, I know, dark, but it's true. Mad dogs need to be put down. The cruel colonel, the British crime writer Tom Sleeman and his friend criminologist Keith Andrews announced in April 2001 that they had found new evidence identifying the Ripper. He was a military man from Gloucester, Colonel Claude Conder, they said. In an interview with the Gloucester Echo, 13th of April 2001, which is interesting because today is the 13th of April, the 2 men claimed that their clues included cryptic messages carved on the victims' bodies in ancient languages which Conder knew from working as an archaeologist in the Middle East. John Sleeman told the newspaper, Jack the Ripper was a brilliant 39-year-old British intelligence officer, archaeologist, writer, map maker, and trained killer. The man Keith and I know to be the Whitechapel murderer has lain in Cheltenham Cemetery for 91 years. His name was Claude Rainier Conder. He was born in Cheltenham and had many relatives there. He was not suspected of being the Ripper at the time of the killings, and even so-called ripperologists will not have heard of him. The researchers said that the 19th century Metropolitan Police Chief, Sir Charles Warren, who was in charge of the hunt for the Ripper, was a close friend of Colonel Conder. Warren knew Conder was the killer, but took the secret to his grave when he died in 1927. During the 1860s, Warren and Conder had served together in the Royal Engineers. Both archaeologists, they excavated hundreds of Middle East sites and wrote an internationally successful book about their discoveries. A crucial link to the Whitechapel murders was a trove of rings and ornaments they removed from King Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. The prostitute Annie Chapman stole several of these treasures from Colonel Conder's London house. She was a friend of the other 4 women who would become the Ripper's victims, and all cooperated in selling the booty. The outraged Conder hunted the women down and exacted a dreadful revenge. Tom Sleeman said, "He was a trained killer who specialised in close surveillance of the enemy and swooping using ancient techniques. He would watch the routines of the patrolling soldiers for hours, then attack silently and from behind, under the cloak of darkness. The throat's victim was slit before he could make a sound." These deadly skills came in very useful in 1888. Colonel Conder retired to Cheltenham, where in 1910 he suffered a stroke that would prove fatal. Tom Sleeman said, "The Ripper took almost 3 weeks to pass away from a cerebral embolism that left him paralysed and in a state of terror. Who knows what vengeful spectres haunted the deathbed of a man who took the lives of 5 women in a sinister and brutally horrific way." The self-incriminating artist. In 2003, the best-selling crime novelist Patricia Cornwell published a deeply researched book, Portrait of a Killer, Jack the Ripper, Case Closed. The culprit, Cornwell claimed, was the 28-year-old impressionist painter Walter Sickert, who was in East London at the time of the killings, and in the early 20th century produced a macabre series of paintings depicting murdered prostitutes. In her study of the case, the celebrated writer spent $4 million. My goodness. She bought 30 Sickert paintings, some at $70,000 apiece, and paid forensic scientists to scour his painting table, juxtaposed his images with morgue photos of the victims, and found clues in the artist's early history. Sickert, he discovered, had a psychological profile typical of many serial killers. His father had been abusive. He grew up to be a nervous, compulsive person who washed his hands incessantly. His mental disorder might have been exacerbated by an early trauma. A great-nephew revealed that, as a child, Sickert underwent painful surgery for a fistula on his penis, an operation thought to have left him sterile. Thrice married, Sickert was never able to father children. His sexual disability might have exploded into a murderous rage against women. The book, during whose production the author flew an entire team of forensic experts to Britain, contains what some see as compelling proof that Sickert was guilty, but as with all Ripper exposés, not everyone is convinced. Letters from Hell. On 27th of September 1888, 19 days after the murder of Annie Chapman, London's Central News Agency received an envelope addressed to the boss. Inside, written in red ink, was the following letter. 25th of September 1888. Dear Boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and want to start again. You will soon hear of me with my funny little games. I saved some proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope. Ha ha. The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ears off and send to the police officers, just for jolly, wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work, then give it out straight. My knife's so nice and sharp, I want to get to work right away, if I get a chance. Good luck, yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind me giving the trade name. Scrawled horizontally in the ink-stained letter's margin were the words, wasn't good enough to post this before I got all the red ink off my hands. Curse it. No luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now. Ha ha. The news agency's manager sent the letter to Scotland Yard. Soon afterward a card postmarked 1st of October and in the same handwriting arrived. I wasn't coddling, dear old boss, when I gave you the tip. You'll hear about Saucy Jackie's work tomorrow. Double event, this time number 1. Squealed a bit, couldn't finish off. Had no time to get ears for police. Thanks for keeping last letter back till I got to work again. Jack the Ripper. Detectives were divided about whether the two letters might be genuine. The double event threatened in the second communication had certainly occurred, with the deaths of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes on 30th of September. It was possible the card had contained a prediction by the murderer, but in the light of the 1st of October postmark it was equally conceivable that a hoaxer had written the message after the killings occurred. Scotland Yard took a chance and posted facsimiles of the letters to every newspaper and police station in the hope that someone would recognise the handwriting. The idea backfired. Hundreds of hoax letters, all signed Jack the Ripper, began to pour into police headquarters. But other missives were characterised by the tantalising possibility that they might be genuine. A chilling example was received in mid-October by George Lusk, chairman of the Mile End Vigilance Committee. It was bloodily wrapped around what appeared to be part of a human kidney. From hell, Mr. Lusk saw. I think that's short for senior, maybe? I don't know. SOR. From hell, Mr. Lusk saw. As he meant sir, then he would have spelt it with an I. Well, anyway. I send you half the kidney I took from one woman. Preserved it for you. Right, this is written kind of as English slang. T'other piece I fried and ate it. It was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out, if you only wait a while longer. Signed, Catch Me When You Can, Mr. Lusk. Hoping that the kidney might merely have been bought at a butcher's shop, the distressed Lusk, accompanied by one of his committee members, took it to the London hospital, where they sought forensic help from a Dr. T. Openshaw. Initially, the doctor presented his finding verbally, a naive mistake, as reporters immediately rushed off to sensationalise what he had said. In self-defence, he then released a short written statement. The specimen, Openshaw said, was a left kidney taken from an adult human and preserved in spirits. It had belonged to someone with Bright's disease. At the inquest into Catherine Eddowes, the police surgeon testified that she too had been afflicted with Bright's disease, a powerful indication that the kidney mailed to George Lusk might have been hers. Several days after his report was published, Dr. Openshaw received this letter at the London hospital. Old boss, you was right. It was the left kidney I was going to happerate again, close to your hospital, just as I was going to draw my knife along of her bloomin' throat. Them cusses of coppers spoilt the game, but I guess I'll be on the job soon and will send you another bit of innards. Jack the Ripper, certainly not the grammar or writing or cadence of an educated man that they claimed him to be. Just saying, as he deliberately wrote like that, you know, how we modern people write abbreviations and tweets and with emojis and weird ungrammaticized English. Oh, have you seen the devil with his microscope and scalpel looking at a kidney with a slide cocked up? The writer of the two kidney-related letters appears to have been barely literate. It may well have been the case. This may well have been the case. But if he was in fact the Ripper, his misspelt and clumsily punctuated correspondence might simply have been an attempt at deception, arguably perpetrated by an insane upper-class Englishman with degrees in literature and medicine. It's so poorly written that it's possible he faked it. At the height of the horror murders that terrified London, police received hundreds of letters purportedly written by Jack the Ripper. Only a handful, including the above, were considered possibly genuine. And the picture of the killer with a knife in his hand, pushing down a woman is titled The Fiend at Work, a contemporary illustrator's probably erroneous notion of what Jack the Ripper might look like. The identity of the crazed kidney sender is just one more enigma to reflect upon in the mirror world of mystery surrounding Jack the Ripper. Right, this concludes today's reading of that chapter and that subject. I shall continue tomorrow with Did British Agents Execute Hess? I would continue reading for the next chapter, but it's only a very short one actually. But I find myself rather tired now, so I'll save it for tomorrow. Hasta mañana, till we meet again. And sleep well, dream sweet, but hard to dream sweet when you've just been confronted with all that real-lived horror back in 1888, but it is what it is. People of Earth have to live in the real world, and we have to study all the things that can go wrong with human existence, and hold on to our sanity and hold our heads high and keep living the psychedelic dreaming and choosing life, and choosing to be surrounded by goodness and righteousness and peace, even if you have to manifest it from your own heart and soul sometimes, which gets a bit hard when you see all the ghastly horrors perpetrated even in our modern day contemporary world on a daily basis. Like I said, there's maniacs everywhere, and some of them we don't even suspect. And in the case of Jack the Ripper, got away with it over and over and over again. Horrible thought, isn't it? Ugh. But on a happy note, tomorrow's another day, and love the ones who love you back truly and honouringly, and live your best life. Bye for now, people of Earth. Good evening from Sacred Space and Today.